Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief, 2010. Analyses and explanations. This comprehensive analysis begins with an overview of the film's production context. Directed by Chris Columbus, a veteran of early Harry Potter adaptations, the 2010 film Percy Jackson and the Olympians. The Lightning Thief was a major studio bet to launch a new fantasy franchise. With a substantial budget, it aimed to translate Rick Riordan's beloved novel into a cinematic spectacle, albeit with significant creative liberties that would define its legacy and reception. The film's commercial performance was solid, indicating an audience appetite for modern mythological adventure. However, its critical reception was tepid, often citing a feeling of derivative storytelling that rushed through mythological references without the depth of its source material. This dichotomy between box office success and critical dismissal is central to understanding the film's place in pop culture. One of the most profound analytical points is the deliberate aging up of the protagonists. By making Percy, Annabeth, and Grover teenagers instead of 12-year-olds, the film altered the story's fundamental nature. The novel's core is about a child navigating a terrifying, adult-sized world. The film transforms it into a more standard teen action adventure, losing the coming-of-age vulnerability. The quest's motivation is fundamentally shifted. In the film, the primary drive is to rescue Percy's mother, Sally, from the underworld. While emotionally resonant, this simplifies the narrative into a personal rescue mission, downplaying the epic, world-ending stakes of a war among the gods that is central to the novel's plot. The antagonist structure is notably streamlined and diminished. The film reveals Luke Castellan as the sole thief and positions him as the final boss. This omission of the god Ares, who serves as a formidable physical adversary and red herring in the book, removes a layer of divine manipulation and reduces the sense of the god's pervasive, dangerous politics. A critical analytical omission is the complete absence of the Titan Kronos. The novel carefully plants Kronos as the overarching villain pulling the strings, with Luke as his pawn. The film's decision to exclude this element stripped the story of its series-long narrative arc, making it a self-contained episode rather than a chapter in a saga. The portrayal of the Lotus Casino sequence is a key example of the film's literal and modern interpretation of myth. While visually engaging as a trap of hedonistic delights, the film's version leans into a more straightforward time loss concept, somewhat glossing over the myth's deeper commentary on addictive oblivion that the novel preserves. Logan Lerman's performance as Percy Jackson is often highlighted as the film's emotional anchor. His portrayal balances confusion, sarcasm, and burgeoning heroism effectively, making the character relatable despite the script's deviations. He embodies the everyman quality essential to Percy's appeal. The reinterpretation of Grover Underwood by Brandon T. Jackson shifts the character from a nervous, nature-focused satyr in the books to a wisecracking, pop-culture reference sidekick. This analysis notes that while it provides comic relief, it dilutes the mythological creature's connection to the wild and his role as a protector. Annabeth Chase, played by Alexandra Daddario, is analyzed as a capable but underdeveloped warrior. The film's script gives her less of the strategic genius and resentment towards her mother, Athena, that defines her in the novels. Her blonde hair, iconic trait, is notably absent, a symbolic change that frustrated many fans. The supporting cast delivers memorable, if stylized, performances. Uma Thurman's Medusa is a highlight, blending chilling menace with a twisted domesticity. Steve Coogan's Hades, portrayed as a leather-clad, underworld lounge singer, is a bold but divisive modernization that trades ancient terror for contemporary sleaze. The film's world-building is its most creatively successful element. The concept of Mount Olympus residing atop the Empire State Building and the underworld's entrance being in Hollywood cleverly grounds ancient mythology in American iconography. This establishes a recognizable yet fantastical landscape for the adventure. However, an internal analysis suggests that these creative locations sometimes feel like episodic pit stops rather than organic parts of a journey. The narrative can seem like a checklist of mythological encounters, Medusa here, the Hydra there, without the cohesive thread of the novel's prophecy-driven quest. The portrayal of Camp Half-Blood serves as a functional but abbreviated training ground. The analysis points out that the film rushes through Percy's discovery and training, reducing the camp's role as a sanctuary and home for demigods, which is so central to the book's heart and world. The dynamic between the core trio is built on a faster, more antagonistic banter, particularly between Percy and Annabeth. Their relationship arc from rivalry to respect is accelerated, leaning into a potential romantic tension suited for the older age group, which differs from the slower-building, deep friendship and eventual romance of the source. The thematic depth is notably shallower. The novel explores themes of parental abandonment, identity, and destiny through the lens of half-blood children. The film touches on Percy's struggle with his father's absence, but often prioritizes action set pieces over exploring these complex emotional landscapes. The visual effects and action sequences, such as the fight with the Hydra at the Parthenon replica or the escape from the underworld, are competently executed. They serve the film's goal of being an accessible fantasy action film, though they sometimes rely on conventional CGI spectacle. The score and soundtrack contribute to the film's contemporary feel, further distancing it from any attempt at classical mythic tone. The use of modern music aligns with the film's overarching goal to present mythology as something living and integrated into the present day. Rick Riordan's public disappointment with the film is a crucial part of its legacy analysis. His criticism underscores the gap between a faithful adaptation that honors the spirit of the characters and plot, and a Hollywood product that reshapes the material to fit perceived blockbuster formulas. The film's ending sets up a sequel with Luke's escape and warning, but without the Chronos framework, the threat feels smaller and less ominously cosmic. It hints at future conflicts but lacks the foundational dread of a returning Titan King that the book's conclusion masterfully establishes. Ultimately, Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, 2010, can be analyzed as a standalone fantasy adventure that uses the novel's premise as a skeleton. Its legacy is that of a cautionary tale and adaptation, highlighting how changes to core character ages, central motivations, and overarching villains can alter the soul of a story, even while achieving moderate commercial success. This analysis delves into the cinematic interpretation of Rick Riordan's novel, a project that reimagined mythological narrative for a broad film audience. The directorial choice of Chris Columbus signaled an intent to capture a family-friendly adventure tone, reminiscent of his earlier blockbuster successes. A considerable production budget facilitated the creation of diverse mythical environments and creatures through contemporary visual effects. The central premise of gods existing in the modern world provided a fertile ground for creative and humorous juxtapositions. Significant narrative alterations were implemented, fundamentally shifting the story's emotional core and overarching stakes from the source material. Aging the protagonists transformed their journey from a child's bewildering introduction to a secret world into a more conventional teenage action narrative. This decision impacted character dynamics, particularly the nature of their fears and the scale of their challenges. The quest's primary motivation, becoming a rescue mission, personalizes the conflict, but simultaneously diminishes the epic, Olympus-shaking consequences. By focusing on a singular human antagonist in Luke, the film streamlined a more complex divine conspiracy present in the original text. The omission of key mythological figures like Ares and the looming threat of Chronos removed layers of political intrigue and foreshadowing. This simplification allowed for a self-contained story, but at the cost of the rich tapestry of divine manipulation and long-term narrative seeds. The film's climax thus revolves around a personal vendetta rather than a confrontation that hints at a greater, ancient evil. Character portrayals offered a mixed fidelity to their literary counterparts, with performances often emphasizing different traits. Logan Lerman's embodiment of Percy captured a relatable everyman quality, balancing adolescent sarcasm with a growing sense of duty. Alexandra Daddario presented an Annabeth of immediate physical capability, though with less emphasis on her strategic intellect and deep-seated familial tensions. Brandon T. Jackson infused Grover with a vibrant, modern comedic energy that diverged from the classically anxious satyr persona. Supporting roles were delivered with distinct and memorable stylistic choices, interpreting gods and monsters through a contemporary lens. Uma Thurman's Medusa exuded a chilling, predatory sophistication, turning myth into a modern horror scenario. Steve Coogan's Hades reimagined the god of the dead as a petulant, rock star-like figure, trading eternal dread for a more humorous, albeit less intimidating characterization. These creative liberties injected personality, but sometimes at the expense of the myth's original gravitas. The film's world-building excels in its conceptual blending of ancient realms with iconic American landmarks, creating an accessible fantasy geography. Mount Olympus gleaming above Manhattan symbolizes the god's remote power overseeing modern civilization. Locating the underworld's entrance in the glitter and falseness of Hollywood serves as a witty critique of the industry's allure and emptiness. The Lotus Casino sequence visually translates the myth's theme of addictive forgetfulness into a glittering trap of contemporary leisure. Pacing and structure often prioritize set-piece encounters over gradual character development or atmospheric buildup. The journey can feel episodic, moving from one mythological threat to the next with functional efficiency. This approach showcases a variety of creatures and deities, but can undermine the sense of a cohesive, escalating odyssey. Tension sometimes derives more from immediate physical danger than from the unfolding of a deeper, prophetic mystery. Thematic exploration of identity and legacy, so central to the novels, is present but rendered with a lighter touch. Percy's struggle with his divine parentage is framed more as a surprise inheritance of power than a lifelong source of confusion and alienation. The complex relationships between the gods and their demigod children are simplified, focusing on paternal acknowledgement rather than the burdens and neglect that come with it. This makes the emotional landscape more straightforward and less fraught with psychological complexity. Visual and special effects work to materialize the mythical within the mundane, with varying degrees of success. Creatures like the Minotaur and the Hydra are realized as competent CGI threats, designed for exciting action sequences. The Mist, a clever device from the books that explains mortals' blindness to mythology, is underutilized, missing opportunities for clever visual tricks that blur perception. Magic and divine abilities are presented as spectacular, but often lack a defined sense of rules or cost. The score and musical choices aim to bridge the ancient and modern, employing sweeping orchestral themes during epic moments alongside contemporary tracks. This sonic landscape supports the film's core identity as a modern adventure story first and a mythological tale second. Sound design during battle scenes emphasizes the clash of ancient weapons in modern settings, reinforcing the central premise. Musical cues often signal emotional beats clearly, adhering to traditional blockbuster language. Comparison to other contemporary fantasy franchises is inevitable, with the film frequently measured against the Harry Potter series. The approach here is less about building a detailed, immersive magical society and more about injecting myth into the recognizable real world. The tone leans slightly more towards action comedy than towards awe or gothic mystery, seeking a different niche within the genre. This positioning influenced both its initial appeal and its long-term reception among fantasy enthusiasts. The adaptation's relationship with its source material became the defining discourse surrounding the film's release and legacy. Fan criticism largely focused not on the existence of changes, but on the nature of changes that altered fundamental story elements. Key absences, like the Oracle's prophecy, remove the framework of fate and foreboding that gives the novel's quest its weight. This divergence created two distinct versions of the same story, pleasing some new viewers while alienating many devoted readers. Marketing and target audience considerations likely influenced several creative decisions, including the aging of the characters. A teenage protagonist allowed for different relational dynamics and a slightly more intense action spectrum. The film incorporates romance and flirtation in a way the original middle-grade novel carefully avoided, appealing to a young adult demographic. This shift expanded commercial potential, but altered the narrative's innocent, discovery-based heart. Costume and production design effectively signal character identities and mythological influences in a subtle, integrated manner. Annabeth's attire suggests practicality and a warrior's readiness without being overtly classical. Camp Half-Blood blends rustic summer camp aesthetics with subtle Greek architectural motifs, making the fantasy element feel grounded. Props like Riptide Anaklusmos retain their iconic form, serving as a direct and faithful link to the reader's imagination. Dialogue often serves to explain mythological concepts to the audience, functioning as expository world-building. This can sometimes feel instructional, breaking immersion to clarify a god's domain or a monster's weakness. The humor derives largely from anachronistic juxtaposition, ancient beings using modern slang or technology. This comedic tone helps maintain a lighthearted atmosphere, even during scenes of potential peril or dramatic revelation. The film's interpretation of the Greek gods emphasizes their human-like pettiness and vanity, consistent with classical mythology. Their appearances are brief but designed to make an impression, showcasing their divine power and flawed personalities. Zeus and Poseidon are presented as stern, patriarchal figures whose conflict drives the plot, but whose emotional depth remains largely unexplored. Their divine realm is one of cloud and marble, a stark contrast to the earthly journey of their children. Action choreography emphasizes Percy's innate, water-enhanced abilities and his rapid learning curve. Fight scenes are clean and dynamic, showcasing his unique connection to his father's element. The contrast between Percy's improvisational style and Annabeth's trained precision visually communicates their different backgrounds. Grover's role in combat is often comedic or supportive, aligning with his reimagined character as less of a traditional fighter. The portrayal of Sally Jackson, Percy's mother, retains her crucial role as a source of unconditional love and mortal stability. Her sacrifice and capture provide the emotional engine for Percy's personal journey in the film. Her relationship with the mystical world is one of protective secrecy, a burden she carries to give her son a normal life. This dynamic grounds the fantastical plot in a relatable human emotion, the love between a parent and child. Symbolism is often visually straightforward, using water as a constant motif for Percy's heritage, safety, and power. Sequences near or in water are where he is most capable and confident, visually reinforcing his lineage. The recurring storm imagery mirrors Zeus's anger and the celestial discord caused by the stolen bolt. Lightning and the sea are established as opposing, powerful forces in both the conflict and the protagonist's own identity. The film's resolution provides closure to the immediate crisis, but leaves threads for potential continuation. The return of the Master Bolt restores a tense peace among the gods, though their dysfunctional family dynamics remain unchanged. Luke's survival and escape clearly mark him for a return, preserving a recurring nemesis. Percy's acceptance at camp and by his father offers a satisfying personal conclusion to his initial crisis of identity. Cultural impact extended beyond the cinema, briefly renewing interest in Greek mythology among its audience. The film served as a gateway for some viewers to discover the richer, more complex book series. Merchandising and promotional materials further embedded the film's specific aesthetic into the public perception of the property. For a period, the film's version of characters and events became the dominant visual reference for the franchise. Critical analysis often points to a disconnect between the film's energetic execution and its narrative depth. Reviews praised the concept and some performances, but found the plotting hurried and the emotional beats occasionally unearned. The film was seen as competently made, but lacking the distinctive voice and careful construction that made the source material special. It fulfilled the basic requirements of a fantasy adventure without surpassing them. From a screenwriting perspective, condensing a novel into a 2-hour runtime necessitated cuts and consolidations. Subplots involving other campers, deeper training, and the day-to-day life at Camp Half-Blood were largely sacrificed for narrative momentum. Key items like the flying shoes and the prophecy's specific warnings are repurposed or omitted, changing how certain events unfold. This streamlining is typical of adaptations, but was particularly impactful here. The film's color palette and cinematography move from the muted, ordinary world of Percy's early life to the more saturated, fantastic realms he discovers. The underworld carries a fiery, industrial aesthetic, differentiating it from the earthly and Olympian settings. Las Vegas is portrayed in its full neon glory, emphasizing its role as a temple of distraction and false promises. Visual contrast helps guide the audience through the shifting tones and locations of the quest. Examination of the film's internal logic reveals a magical system based on lineage and inherited power rather than studied spellcraft. Abilities are tied to divine parentage, making them an intrinsic part of the demigod's identity. The limits of these powers are often defined by the plot's needs, providing flexibility for exciting sequences. This approach differs from hard magic systems, favoring spectacle and character expression over rigorous consistency. The dynamic between Percy and Luke serves as the central hero-villain relationship, framed as a dark mirror. Luke represents the embittered outcome of a neglected demigod, turning his resentment against the divine parents. Their final confrontation is as much a clash of ideologies about the god's worthiness as it is a physical duel. This provides a thematic core about forgiveness, legacy, and whether the flaws of parents invalidate their children's worth. Representation of disability through Grover's limp is subtle and inconsistent, often forgotten when action requires. His sadder nature is primarily communicated through his personality and loyalty rather than extensive prosthetic effects. This choice likely stemmed from both budgetary concerns and a desire to keep the character agile for comedic and action beats. It represents another departure from the book's more consistent physical portrayal. The film's handling of mystery elements, such as the identity of the lightning thief, is simplified for a cinematic audience. Clues are presented visually and directly, with less room for the audience to piece together a complex conspiracy. The revelation about Luke occurs during the climax, providing a twist that recontextualizes his earlier mentorship. This structure creates a straightforward narrative arc of trust betrayed. Tonal shifts between comedy, action, and brief moments of horror are managed with a light touch, ensuring the film remains accessible to a younger demographic. Scary moments, like Medusa's unveiling, are quickly undercut by action or resolution. This prevents the film from dwelling in darkness, maintaining its primary identity as an adventurous romp. The balance prioritizes entertainment and pace over sustained tension or dread. Product placement and contemporary brand integration subtly reinforce the setting of mythology in the modern world. Characters use recognizable products, travel on real highways, and encounter everyday Americana. This grounding technique helps sell the fantastical elements by contrasting them with an utterly familiar reality. It reinforces the core joke that these ancient forces are living just beside us, unseen. The film's title sequence and opening exposition efficiently establish the core premise. The Greek gods are real and still active. Using a classroom setting for this info dump is a clever narrative shortcut, mirroring how the audience is learning alongside Percy. Visual montages of famous historical events hinted to be the work of gods add depth and scale to the backstory. This setup is economically effective, if not particularly subtle. Analysis of Annabeth's characterization reveals a warrior archetype with hints of a deeper backstory that remains unexplored. Her initial hostility towards Percy stems from a generalized distrust of Poseidon's children, not the deeply personal history with a daughter of Athena from the novels. Her wisdom manifests as tactical skill rather than intellectual or strategic genius. This makes her a capable ally but simplifies the rich rivalry-turned partnership of the source. The role of food and sustenance, a minor but recurring theme in the novels, is largely absent. The magical life-sustaining qualities of ambrosia and nectar are not explored, removing a layer of divine connection and potential peril. Scenes of communal meals at camp that build camaraderie are cut for time. This omission is minor, but contributes to the slightly less tactile feeling of the film's mythological world. Percy's mastery of his abilities follows a cinematic, power-up trajectory, often triggered by moments of high emotion or dire need. His connection to water is portrayed as almost instinctual, a birthright he simply learns to trust. There is little formal training shown, emphasizing the idea of the natural hero over the trained one. This aligns with common heroic narratives where innate talent triumphs over practiced skill. The film's interpretation of mythological monsters treats them as persistent threats that can be defeated but not permanently destroyed. Their reformation in Tartarus is mentioned, adding a sense of cyclical, eternal conflict. This aligns with the myths themselves, where monsters are recurring challenges for heroes. It introduces a world where battles are won, but ancient evils are never fully erased, waiting to return. Use of aerial and wide shots during travel sequences emphasizes the cross-country scale of the quest, from New York to Los Angeles. These vistas contrast with the intimate, often claustrophobic settings of the mythological encounters. The journey across America itself becomes a character, a landscape hiding ancient secrets in plain sight. This national canvas makes the story feel uniquely American, unlike the more localized or European journeys of other fantasies. The ethical dimension of the quest, such as the decision to use Medusa's head as a weapon, is presented as a clever tactical choice rather than a moral dilemma. The film's pace allows little room for characters to debate the consequences of using such a horrifying object. This reflects a more black-and-white morality where tools of evil can be justly used against evil itself. Complexity is sacrificed for narrative efficiency and clear heroic action. Sound motifs, like the whispering voices in the Lotus Casino or the roar of the underworld, build atmosphere in key locations. Percy's leitmotif often incorporates aquatic sounds or melodies, sonically tagging his lineage. The Master Bolt itself carries a distinctive crackling energy sound, making its power audibly palpable. These auditory details enrich the sensory experience of the film's fantastical elements. The film's portrayal of dyslexia and ADHD as demigod traits is mentioned but not deeply integrated into the character's experiences. It's presented as a quirky indicator of his true nature rather than a daily challenge he has faced his whole life. This conceptual link is clever, but lacks the exploration of how these neurodivergent traits actually aid in his mythical perception and combat skills. It remains more of a fun fact than a characterized reality. Cinematic references and homages to other adventure films, notably the Harry Potter series and the Odyssey, are woven into its fabric. The training camp, the trio on a quest, and the half-blood heritage all invite comparison to other fantasy works. The journey structure mirrors classical epic templates, albeit in a compressed and modernized form. The film is aware of its genre predecessors and operates comfortably within that established framework. The economic context of the production, following the massive success of other young adult adaptations, positioned it as a potential franchise starter. Financial investment in sets, creatures, and casting aimed for longevity. This business reality influenced creative decisions, pushing for a broader, more commercially safe appeal that might not alienate any segment of the potential audience. The result is a film that sometimes feels market-tested in its approach. Character arcs, while present, undergo accelerated development due to the condensed timeline. Percy's acceptance of his father happens over days, not the months of the book. Annabeth's thawing towards Percy is swift, moving from hostility to trust within the framework of shared danger. Grover's loyalty is a constant, with less of his own quest for a searcher's license to drive his actions. Arcs are simplified to their essential beats. The film's use of prophecy and fate is minimized, changing the nature of the character's agency. Without the Oracle's words, their journey feels more like a reactive series of events rather than steps towards a foretold destiny. This removes a layer of tragic inevitability and the burden of choice that the book's prophecy imposes. The characters become masters of their immediate fate, less constrained by a predetermined path. Visual cues for divine blood are understated. No glowing signs or obvious markers, relying on ability manifestation. This allows the demigods to pass in the mortal world seamlessly, a key part of the premise. When powers are used, the effects are visually distinct. Water manipulation, combat brilliance, or environmental intuition. The mist is the implied explanation for why these displays don't cause widespread mortal panic. The resolution of Sally Jackson's storyline provides emotional closure, with her freed from the underworld and given a chance at a better life. Her relationship with the mysterious Mr. Brunner, Chiron, hints at a deeper understanding and history. Her final scene, proud of her son, grounds the epic finale in a human, domestic moment. This reaffirms the film's theme that mortal love and family are the ultimate rewards, not just divine approval. In retrospect, the film functions as a time capsule of late 2000s blockbuster filmmaking sensibilities. Fast-paced, visually busy, and eager to please. Its strengths lie in its high-concept premise and committed performances from a charismatic cast. Its weaknesses stem from a reluctance to fully embrace the unique tone and intricate plotting of its source material. It stands as a divergent adaptation that ultimately paved the way for a more faithful television reinterpretation, highlighting the evolving relationship between authors and the film industry. The cinematic endeavor to adapt Rick Riordan's novel represents a significant case study in translating young adult literature to the big screen. A primary analytical focus must be the fundamental recontextualization of the narrative stakes and character motivations from page to screen. This translation process involved deliberate choices that reshaped the story's emotional and thematic core for a different medium and perceived audience. The alteration of the protagonist's ages stands as perhaps the most impactful deviation, initiating a cascade of changes to interpersonal dynamics and perceived threats. Consequently, the journey evolves from a child's vulnerable exploration of a hidden world into a more assured teenage adventure saga. This aging-up strategy directly influences the film's tonal register, nudging it closer to conventional action-oriented fantasy and away from the novel's middle-grade sense of wonder and personal discovery. The characters' responses to mythological dangers become those of capable adolescents rather than frightened children, changing the audience's relationship to the perceived risk. Furthermore, the central quest's driving force is powerfully redirected toward a familial rescue mission, prioritizing an immediate emotional hook over the grand geopolitical intrigue of the gods. This shift successfully personalizes the narrative for a broad audience, but inadvertently diminishes the epic scale of a potential divine war. By centering the conflict on retrieving Sally Jackson, the film's plot mechanics revolve around a straightforward goal with clear emotional consequences. However, this comes at the cost of the novel's more complex layering of a mystery thriller, where the identity of the true thief and the machinations of a forgotten titan provide narrative depth. The cinematic version simplifies this into a linear race against time to save a loved one, a classic and effective structure that nonetheless sacrifices the source material's intricate plotting. The looming specter of Olympian conflict becomes a backdrop rather than an imminent cataclysm. Antagonistic forces are similarly streamlined, consolidating villainy into the embittered demigod Luke Castellan as a singular, comprehensible foe. The removal of the god Ares as a manipulated pawn and brutal physical adversary excises a layer of divine fallibility and dangerous unpredictability. This omission simplifies the moral landscape, presenting a clearer divide between hero and villain without the gray areas of divine pettiness and manipulation. The final confrontation thus lacks the shocking revelation of a god's involvement and the sheer, overwhelming power differential Percy must overcome through wit in the novel. Most consequentially, the excision of the Titan Kronos' shadowy influence severs the story from its intended serialized arc. In the literary source, Luke's betrayal is not an endpoint but an ominous beginning, a first move in a centuries-old cosmic chess game. The film's conclusion, while leaving room for sequel bait, resolves its central conflict with a definitive finality that the book deliberately avoids. This choice renders the adaptation a closed narrative loop rather than an opening chapter, fundamentally altering its purpose within a larger mythological framework. Performative interpretations offer a spectrum of fidelity, with Logan Lerman's portrayal successfully capturing Percy's sardonic humor and latent heroic integrity. His performance grounds the fantastical events in a relatable adolescent bewilderment and burgeoning courage. Alexandra Daddario embodies Annabeth's physical prowess and initial wariness, though the script affords her less opportunity to demonstrate the strategic intellect that is her defining trait. The character's depth, tied to her complex relationship with her absent mother Athena, remains largely unexplored in favor of action competency. Brandon T. Jackson's Grover undergoes the most radical reinterpretation, transforming from a nature-connected, anxiety-prone protector into a source of contemporary comic relief. This version prioritizes levity and pop-cultural rapport, often using Grover as a vehicle to undercut tension with humor. While this provides accessible entertainment, it distances the character from his mythological roots as a satyr and his narrative role as a dedicated seeker on a personal quest, elements that grant him gravity in the novels. Supporting characters are rendered with vivid, if intentionally anachronistic, flair, presenting gods and monsters through a modern caricaturist lens. Uma Thurman's Medusa exudes a venomous glamour, her garden statue business a perfectly macabre cover for a modern Gorgon. Steve Coogan's Hades, reimagined as a louche, temperamental rock star ruling a fiery nightclub, trades mythological dread for a specific brand of sleazy charisma. These choices inventively suggest how ancient beings might adapt to contemporary culture, even if they prioritize concept over classical reverence. The film's most lauded achievement lies in its imaginative world-building, seamlessly stitching mythological realms into the fabric of modern American iconography. The concept of Olympus hovering above the Empire State Building brilliantly visualizes the god's remote dominion over human endeavor. Positioning the entrance to the underworld within the Hollywood sign offers a witty critique of the industry's manufactured dreams and tragic ends. These location choices are not merely settings but active commentaries, blending myth with cultural metaphor. The Lotus Hotel and Casino sequence effectively translates Homeric myth into a critique of modern hedonistic distraction, with its endless games and pleasures designed to erode purpose. This set piece visually captures the seductive danger of oblivion through comfort, a timeless theme given a flashy, contemporary veneer. However, the execution sometimes favors the spectacle of the environment over the psychological insidiousness of the Lotus's effect, making the escape feel more like breaking a spell than resisting a profound addiction. Narrative pacing often adopts a brisk, episodic rhythm, moving the trio from one mythological encounter to the next with functional efficiency. This structure showcases a variety of creatures and deities, functioning almost as a greatest hits of Greek monsters. While entertaining, this approach can undermine a sense of cumulative journey, as each challenge is resolved and left behind without deeper narrative residue. The quest can feel like a connected series of action sequences rather than a cohesive odyssey with escalating stakes. Thematic exploration of identity, a cornerstone of the novels, is present but rendered with broader, more accessible strokes. Percy's struggle is framed as coming to terms with a sudden inheritance of power and legacy, rather than a lifelong negotiation with feelings of otherness and academic struggle tied to his demigod nature. The profound tension between mortal and divine halves, and the resulting sense of not belonging in either world, is softened into a more generic hero's origin story. Visual effects work to materialize the fantastical within a recognizable reality, with creatures like the Minotaur and the Hydra serving as competent CGI adversaries. The aesthetic of these beings often leans into a realistic monstrousness, avoiding a more stylized mythological look. The mist, a clever narrative device explaining mortal blindness, is underutilized as a visual tool for seamless world integration, missing opportunities for clever cinematic sleight of hand that could have enriched the setting's believability. Musical composition bridges ancient epic and modern adventure, employing orchestral grandeur for mythological moments and more contemporary rhythms for character-based scenes. The score functions to clearly signal emotional beats and genre expectations, supporting the film's identity as a light-hearted action-adventure first. Sound design emphasizes the clash of ancient and modern, such as the roar of antique monsters against city backdrops, reinforcing the core premise of Hidden Worlds. Comparisons to other fantasy franchises, particularly Harry Potter, are inevitable given the director's involvement and the foundational chosen one in a hidden world trope. The film differentiates itself by rooting its magic not in a separate, parallel society, but in the clandestine infiltration of the mythical into the utterly familiar. Its tone is generally sunnier and less gothic, aiming for a sense of adventurous fun rather than accumulating mystery or dread. This positioning sought a distinct, more Americana-centric niche within the genre landscape. The adaptation's relationship with its source material became its defining legacy, sparking debates about fidelity, artistic license, and authorial intent. Fan consternation largely centered on changes that altered the story's foundational pillars: age, prophecy, and serialized villainy, rather than superficial details. The absence of the Oracle's prophecy removed the framework of fate and foreboding that gives the novel's events a sense of tragicomic inevitability. This divergence created parallel but distinct narratives, one cherished for its depth and the other often viewed as a superficial echo. Marketing imperatives and demographic targeting undoubtedly shaped key creative decisions, including the shift to older protagonists. A teenage Percy allowed for different romantic subtexts, more intense action, and an appeal to the lucrative young adult filmgoer segment. This commercial calculation, while understandable, fundamentally altered the narrative's innocent, discovery-based heart and the specific coming-of-age concerns of a 12-year-old navigating a newly revealed heritage. Production and costume design communicate character and myth through subtle integration rather than overt spectacle. Camp Half-Blood feels like a rustic summer camp adorned with Greek architectural accents, making the fantasy feel lived in and plausible. Annabeth's attire suggests practicality and readiness, a modern take on a warrior's garb. Iconic items like Riptide retain their form, serving as tangible bridges to the reader's imagination and symbols of heroic legacy. Expository dialogue often serves an educational function, directly explaining mythological rules and relationships to the audience. This can interrupt narrative flow, but efficiently builds the world for viewers unfamiliar with the lore. The film's humor frequently arises from anachronism, ancient beings employing modern slang or technology, a choice that maintains a consistent tone of light-hearted irreverence. This comedic approach demystifies the gods, presenting them as dysfunctional, powerful personalities with contemporary affectations. The portrayal of the Olympian Council emphasizes their detachment and volatile pride, captured in brief but impactful scenes. Zeus and Poseidon are archetypal stern patriarchs, their conflict driven by bruised egos and ancient grudges. Their divine realm is one of cold marble and cloud, aesthetically distancing them from the earthy, messy reality of their children's journey. These depictions align with mythological sources, but offer little exploration beyond their roles as plot instigators. Action choreography highlights Percy's instinctual, water-based prowess, often depicting his power as an extension of his emotions. Fight sequences are clean and dynamic, visually distinguishing his untrained, reactive style from Annabeth's practiced technique. Grover's combat role is supportive and comedic, utilizing his satyr agility for evasion and distraction rather than direct confrontation. This division of labor visually reinforces their character roles within the trio. Sally Jackson's character retains her crucial narrative function as the emotional anchor to the mortal world and the source of Percy's core humanity. Her sacrifice is the catalyst for his personal journey, and her unconditional love is positioned as his ultimate motivation and reward. Her nuanced understanding of the mythical world, born of protective secrecy, adds a layer of tragic resilience to her character. This dynamic ensures the epic fantasy remains rooted in a universally relatable emotional truth. Symbolism is conveyed through clear visual motifs, with water serving as a constant representation of Percy's heritage, safety, and latent power. Scenes involving water are where he demonstrates agency and control, visually affirming his lineage. Storm and lightning imagery externally manifest Zeus's wrath and the celestial discord threatening the world. These opposing elements of sea and storm visually dramatize the central conflict and the protagonist's divided allegiance between his father's domain and his uncle's accusation. The film's resolution provides satisfying closure to the immediate crisis while leaving a thread for continuation. The restoration of the Master Bolt concludes the primary MacGuffin chase, and Percy's vindication secures his place at Camp Half-Blood. Luke's survival and escape clearly mark him as a recurring threat, though without the ominous weight of his role as a Titan's pawn. The ending offers a personal victory for Percy, but lacks the book's haunting coda that hints at a far greater, looming war. Cultural impact briefly revitalized mainstream interest in Greek mythology, serving as a visual primer for a new generation. The film became a gateway for many viewers to discover the richer, more complex literary series, despite its deviations. Its specific aesthetic, the look of the camp, the weapons, the monsters, for a time dominated the public's visual conception of Riordan's universe. This demonstrates the power of cinema to shape collective imagery, even of adapted properties. Critical reception frequently noted a disconnect between the film's energetic presentation and its narrative substance. Reviews acknowledged the appealing premise and charismatic cast, but criticized the hurried plot and underdeveloped emotional beats. The consensus often positioned it as a competent but unexceptional entry in the post-Potter fantasy landscape, one that executed familiar beats without capturing the distinctive voice or careful construction of its source. It was seen as a product rather than a passion project. From a screenwriting perspective, condensing the novel required significant narrative compression and the consolidation of plot elements. Subplots involving other campers, detailed training, and the daily rhythms of Camp Half-Blood were sacrificed for forward momentum. Key items and prophecies were repurposed or omitted, altering cause and effect within the story. This streamlining is a standard adaptation challenge, but the choices made here fundamentally reshaped the story's scope and thematic resonance. Cinematography and color grading visually chart Percy's journey from a muted, ordinary reality to increasingly saturated fantastical realms. The underworld is rendered in fiery oranges and oppressive shadows, evoking an industrial inferno. Las Vegas glows with artificial neon, perfectly capturing its role as a temple of hollow distraction. These deliberate palettes guide the audience emotionally, distinguishing the tones and inherent dangers of each location. The film's internal logic for magic and divine power is intrinsically tied to lineage, a system of inherited talent rather than learned craft. Abilities manifest instinctively, often under duress, emphasizing the idea of a birthright waiting to be unlocked. The limitations of these powers are fluid, defined more by dramatic necessity than rigid rules, favoring spectacular moments over systematic consistency. This soft magic system suits the film's action-adventure priorities, but differs from the book's slightly more defined rules. The dynamic between Percy and Luke functions as a classic hero-villain mirror, with Luke representing the path of bitter resentment. His betrayal stems from a profound sense of abandonment by the gods, making him an ideological antagonist as much as a physical one. Their final clash is a battle over the worthiness of their divine parents and the choice between reforming or destroying the existing order. This provides a clear, thematically relevant conflict about legacy and forgiveness. Representation of Grover's Satyr nature is inconsistent, with his physical traits like hooves and a limp appearing sporadically. This likely stemmed from practical filmmaking concerns regarding actor mobility and the desire to keep the character agile for comedic timing. His mythological essence is conveyed more through personality, loyalty, protectiveness, a connection to nature, than through persistent physical prosthetics. This is a clear compromise between literary accuracy and cinematic practicality. The film's handling of its central mystery, the identity of the lightning thief, is streamlined for cinematic clarity. Clues are presented visually and directly, with less room for the audience to engage in complex deduction. Luke's revelation as the traitor occurs during the third-act confrontation, providing a twist that recontextualizes his earlier mentorship. This structure creates a straightforward arc of trust established and then betrayed, prioritizing emotional impact over intricate plotting. Tonal management navigates between light horror, comedy, and action with a deft hand, ensuring the film remains palatable for a family audience. Truly frightening moments, like Medusa's stone-turning gaze, are quickly resolved or undercut with humor. This prevents the narrative from dwelling in genuine darkness, consistently pulling back toward adventure and spectacle. The overall balance favors brisk entertainment and visual dynamism over sustained atmospheric tension or profound dread. Product integration and contemporary references actively reinforce the mythology among us premise. Characters use real brands, travel on identifiable highways, and interact with mundane modernity. This grounding technique strengthens the contrast when the fantastical erupts, selling the concept that ancient forces operate incognito within our world. It's a world-building choice that enhances verisimilitude for a contemporary setting. The opening exposition, delivered in a classroom setting, efficiently establishes the film's core premise through a clever narrative shortcut. Percy's own ignorance allows for a natural info dump that educates the audience alongside the protagonist. Montages suggesting divine influence on historical events add playful depth and scale to the backstory. This economical setup effectively orients the viewer to the film's unique rules without a protracted prologue. Annabeth's characterization leans into the warrior archetype, with her intellectual prowess suggested, but less demonstrated than her combat skill. Her initial distrust of Percy is presented as a general bias against Poseidon's children, lacking the personal, matrilineal rivalry from the novels. Her wisdom manifests tactically in battle rather than as overarching strategic genius or deep mythological scholarship. This renders her a formidable ally, but simplifies the richly competitive and intellectually charged partnership of the source material. The role of divine sustenance, like ambrosia and nectar, is minimized, removing a layer of mythological texture and potential narrative danger. Scenes of communal dining at camp that foster camaraderie and world-building are largely absent. These omissions, while minor, contribute to a slightly less tactile and culturally rich depiction of demigod life, where the connection to the gods is also maintained through ritual and shared consumption. Percy's mastery of his hydrokinetic abilities follows a classic cinematic trajectory of power unlocked by emotional climax or dire need. His connection to water is portrayed as an instinctual, almost spiritual link he learns to trust rather than a skill he painstakingly develops. The film shows little formal training, emphasizing the born hero narrative where innate talent and courage triumph. This aligns with archetypal storytelling, but differs from the book's emphasis on gradual skill acquisition and mentorship. The film's treatment of mythological monsters acknowledges their cyclical nature, with dialogue noting their reformation in Tartarus. This introduces a concept of eternal recurrence, where threats are defeated but never permanently eradicated. It aligns with the source materials and the original myth's depiction of monsters as persistent forces of chaos. This adds a layer of depth to the world, suggesting that victories are temporary within an endless struggle. Aerial and wide shots during cross-country travel emphasize the vast, epic scale of the American landscape as the quest's backdrop. These expansive vistas contrast sharply with the confined, often interior spaces where mythological encounters occur. The journey itself, from East Coast to West Coast, becomes a symbolic American odyssey, embedding ancient myth into the very geography of the modern nation. This setting choice differentiates it from fantasy journeys through fictional or European landscapes. Ethical complexities, such as the moral weight of using Medusa's severed head as a weapon, are glossed over in favor of its utility as a clever tactical tool. The narrative's pace allows no room for debate about the horror of the object or the potential for its misuse. This reflects a more utilitarian morality within the film's universe, where tools of evil can be justly wielded against evil forces without moral residue. Nuance is sacrificed for narrative efficiency and clear-cut heroic action. Auditory design creates distinctive soundscapes for key locations, such as the hypnotic murmur of the Lotus Casino or the cavernous roars of the underworld. Percy's associative leitmotif often incorporates watery textures or melodies, sonically tagging his divine heritage. The master bolt crackles with a unique, overwhelming energy sound, making its divine power audibly palpable. These careful sonic details enrich the sensory immersion into the film's fantastical elements. The film's handling of Percy's dyslexia and ADHD as battle reflexes and hardwiring for ancient Greek is mentioned as explanatory detail. However, it lacks exploration of how these neurodivergent traits have shaped his lived experience or tangibly aid his demigod abilities beyond a quick explanation. The concept is introduced as a clever twist on his academic struggles, but remains a surface-level character note rather than an integrated aspect of his perception and skills. Cinematic influences and genre homage are evident, with the training camp, trio dynamic, and hidden heritage inviting comparisons to other fantasy franchises. The journey's structure consciously echoes classical epic templates like the Odyssey, albeit in a condensed, modernized form. The film operates comfortably within established blockbuster and adventure genre conventions, aware of its predecessors and aiming to deliver a familiar, yet distinct experience within that framework. The economic context of its production, during the peak of young adult adaptation gold rushes, positioned it as a calculated franchise starter. Investment in effects, stars, and marketing aimed to launch a multi-film series. This commercial reality influenced creative choices, encouraging a broad, inoffensive appeal that would maximize audience reach. The result is a film that sometimes feels strategically assembled to meet market expectations, rather than organically grown from a singular artistic vision. Character arcs undergo accelerated development due to the condensed timeline, with key relationship shifts happening across days instead of weeks or months. Percy's acceptance of his father is a rapid progression from resentment to recognition. Annabeth's trust is earned through shared combat rather than slowly built respect. Grover's loyalty is a steadfast constant, lacking his own parallel quest for identity and purpose. These arcs are simplified to their most essential emotional beats. The diminished role of prophecy and predetermined fate significantly alters the nature of the character's agency. Without the oracle's words guiding and constraining their choices, the journey feels more like a series of reactive adventures than steps along a foretold path. This removes a layer of tragicomic inevitability and the profound burden of choice that the book's prophecy imposes. The characters become active shapers of their immediate destiny, less haunted by a predetermined endpoint. Visual cues for divine heritage are subtle in repose, allowing demigods to blend into mortal society seamlessly. When powers activate, the effects are visually distinct and elementally tied to their parentage. Water manipulation, enhanced combat perception, environmental empathy. The mist is the implied, often invoked mechanism that maintains the masquerade, though its visual manipulation is rarely shown. This system allows for spectacular displays while maintaining the world's secretive premise. The resolution of Sally Jackson's subplot offers heartfelt emotional closure, freeing her from the underworld and offering a hopeful future. Her implicit understanding with Chiron suggests a deeper backstory and a shared commitment to protecting Percy. Her final, proud embrace of her son returns the epic narrative to a human-scale moment of love and family. This reaffirms the film's central theme that mortal connections are the ultimate prize, more valuable than divine glory or power. In retrospective analysis, the film stands as a testament to a specific era of blockbuster adaptation, prioritizing high-concept premise and broad accessibility over niche fidelity. Its strengths are found in its imaginative core concept and the committed efforts of its cast to embody iconic roles. Its enduring legacy, however, is largely defined by its deviations, which ultimately galvanized fan desire for a more authentic retelling. It serves as a pivotal, if flawed, chapter in the property's history, demonstrating both the commercial potential of the world and the perils of divorcing a story from its foundational spirit. The cinematic translation of Rick Riordan's beloved novel represents a fascinating pivot from page to screen, where commercial imperatives and directorial vision intersected with a pre-existing fanbase's expectations. A critical analytical lens reveals how the adaptation process necessitated not just condensation, but a fundamental recalibration of narrative priorities and character essence. The decision to elevate the protagonist's ages from preteen to adolescent stands as the most consequential alteration, setting in motion a chain of effects that reshaped the story's emotional texture and perceived audience. This strategic shift reframed the entire undertaking from a child's eye view of a terrifying, magnificent hidden world into a more standardized teen empowerment narrative, thereby exchanging vulnerability for a burgeoning coolness. This aging-up tactic inherently adjusted the film's tonal palette, steering it toward the familiar shores of action-adventure and away from the novel's distinct blend of middle-school humor and genuine peril. The characters' encounters with mythic beasts thus become tests of burgeoning skill rather than sheer survival against overwhelming odds, altering the foundational empathy of the audience. Moreover, the central narrative engine is decisively rerouted towards a deeply personal rescue objective, privileging an immediate, visceral emotional drive over the intricate political chess game of Olympian discord. While this successfully hooks a viewer's sympathies, it inadvertently reduces the stakes from global, divine annihilation to a more intimate, though no less compelling, familial salvation. By anchoring the plot on retrieving Sally Jackson from Hades' clutches, the film's structural rhythm follows a classic race-against-the-clock template with clear emotional milestones. This approach, however, sidelines the novel's sophisticated detective story layer, where uncovering the true thief and a looming titan's conspiracy provided intellectual intrigue. The cinematic iteration simplifies this multifaceted puzzle into a linear progression of obstacles, a format that delivers consistent action but sacrifices the source material's rewarding complexity and gradual unraveling of a grand conspiracy. The impending war of the gods consequently recedes into a nebulous background threat rather than a ticking clock of cataclysmic proportion. Antagonistic forces are similarly consolidated for cinematic clarity, funneling villainous intent primarily into the embittered figure of Luke Castellan. The excision of the god Ares as a brutish, manipulated adversary removes a crucial demonstration of divine pettiness and the dangerous unpredictability of immortal beings. This simplification creates a more traditional hero versus traitor dynamic, devoid of the gray moral ambiguity and shocking divine betrayal that enriched the original conflict. The final showdown therefore lacks the David versus Goliath terror of facing an actual deity, a confrontation the novel resolves not through brute force, but through clever subterfuge and a deeper understanding of divine nature. Most significantly, the erasure of Kronos' shadowy influence completely severs this introductory chapter from its intended function as a prologue to a larger saga. In the literary narrative, Luke's treachery is merely the first visible crack in a dam holding back primordial chaos, a move in a much older and more terrifying conflict. The film's denouement, while leaving a door ajar for sequels, effectively seals its primary conflict with a definitive resolution that the book deliberately avoids. This transformative choice re-engineers the story from an opening act in an epic serial into a largely self-contained feature-length adventure, fundamentally redefining its narrative purpose and scope. Performative interpretations navigate a spectrum between homage and reinvention, with Logan Lerman's portrayal effectively embodying Percy's defensive sarcasm and inherent moral compass. His performance serves as the audience's conduit, grounding the escalating fantasy in recognizable adolescent exasperation and dawning courage. Alexandra Daddario captures Annabeth's physical competence and initial guardedness, though the screenplay offers fewer avenues to showcase the strategic intellect that is her demigod birthright. The character's profound depth, intrinsically linked to her unresolved yearning for maternal recognition from Athena, remains a largely untapped reservoir of potential drama. Brandon T. Jackson's Grover undergoes the most radical metamorphosis, transitioning from a nature-attuned, anxiety-ridden guardian into a primary source of contemporary comic banter. This reinterpretation prioritizes levity and cultural reference, frequently deploying Grover as a mechanism to puncture tension with humor. While this generates accessible entertainment, it distances the character from his mythological essence as a satyr and his personal narrative arc as a searcher, striving to redeem himself, elements that grant him significant gravity and purpose in the novels. Supporting characters are rendered with bold, anachronistic vibrancy, reimagining ancient entities through a lens of modern archetype and caricature. Uma Thurman's Medusa simmers with a venomous, haute couture menace, her garden statuary business a perfectly macabre front for a contemporary predator. Steve Coogan's Hades, reinvented as a sardonic, leather-clad underworld lounge singer, trades mythological terror for a specific brand of rock star petulance. These inventive choices speculate on how archaic beings might camouflage themselves within modern culture, even if they privilege conceptual audacity over classical reverence. The film's most universally praised accomplishment resides in its inspired production design, which ingeniously grafts mythological geography onto the skeleton of contemporary American landmarks. The conceit of Olympus manifesting above the Empire State Building masterfully visualizes the gods' aloof dominion over human ambition. Situating the gateway to the underworld within the Hollywood sign offers a brilliantly cynical metaphor for an industry built on illusion and faded glory. These location decisions function as active narrative symbols, seamlessly marrying ancient myth with potent cultural critique. The Lotus Hotel and Casino sequence adeptly transposes Homeric allegory into a critique of modern, pleasure-driven oblivion, its endless distractions engineered to dissolve mission and memory. This set piece visually encapsulates the seductive peril of comfort and stagnation, a timeless warning adorned in glitzy, contemporary attire. However, the execution occasionally favors the spectacle of the environment over the psychological insidiousness of the Lotus's grip, making the trio's realization and escape feel more like breaking a simple spell than wrestling free from a profound, addictive lassitude. Narrative pacing frequently adopts a brisk, almost modular rhythm, transporting the trio from one mythological set piece to the next with efficient functionality. This structure operates like a thematic anthology, showcasing a roster of famous creatures and deities from Greek lore. While engaging on a surface level, this approach can impede a sense of cumulative journey, as each confrontation is resolved and geographically left behind without narrative residue. The quest can therefore feel like a connected series of action vignettes, rather than a cohesive odyssey with escalating personal and cosmic stakes. Thematic exploration of identity, a cornerstone of Riordan's work, is acknowledged but rendered with broader, more universally accessible strokes. Percy's internal conflict is framed as accepting a surprising legacy and sudden power, rather than navigating a lifetime of otherness and academic struggle intrinsically linked to his demigod neurology. The profound tension existing between his mortal and divine halves, and the resulting alienation from both worlds, is softened into a more generic narrative of a teenager discovering his hidden talents and true parentage. Visual effects labor to corporealize the fantastical within a mundane reality, with creatures like the Minotaur and the Hydra serving as competent, if conventionally monstrous, CGI adversaries. The aesthetic of these beings often leans into a realistic creature-feature grotesquerie, bypassing a more stylized mythic representation. The Mist, a clever narrative device explaining mortal blindness to the supernatural, remains an underutilized visual concept, missing opportunities for clever cinematic sleight of hand that could have deepened the setting's seamless integration of magic and normality. Musical composition strives to bridge ancient epic sensibility with modern adventure rhythms, employing sweeping orchestral themes for divine moments and more contemporary instrumentation for character-driven scenes. The score operates to clearly signal emotional beats and genre expectations, reinforcing the film's primary identity as a light-hearted action-adventure. Sound design accentuates the collision of ancient and modern, such as the roar of primordial monsters against urban acoustics, continuously underlining the core premise of hidden worlds existing just beneath our perception. Inevitable comparisons to other fantasy franchises, particularly the Harry Potter series, are invited by shared tropes and the director's pedigree. The film differentiates itself by rooting its magic not in a separate, parallel society, but in the clandestine permeation of the mythical into the utterly familiar fabric of North America. Its overall tone is generally brighter and less gothic, aiming for a sense of wide-eyed adventurous fun rather than accumulating mystery or palpable dread. This strategic positioning sought to carve out a distinct, more geographically and tonally American niche within a crowded genre landscape. The adaptation's fraught relationship with its source material constitutes its most enduring legacy, sparking enduring debates concerning artistic license, fan expectations, and authorial endorsement. Fan dissatisfaction largely coalesced around changes that altered the story's foundational architecture: age, prophetic destiny, and serialized villainy, rather than superficial aesthetic choices. The absence of the oracle's prophecy excised the framework of fate and ominous double meaning that lends the novel's events a sense of tragicomic inevitability. This divergence effectively created two parallel narratives, one celebrated for its depth and character nuance, the other often viewed as a high-concept but diluted simulacrum. Marketing imperatives and demographic targeting undoubtedly informed pivotal creative decisions, including the shift to older, more conventionally romantic leads. A teenage Percy permitted the inclusion of flirtatious subtext, more intense physical conflict, and an appeal to the lucrative young adult cinema demographic. This commercial calculus, while economically rational, fundamentally altered the narrative's innocent, discovery-based heart and the specific coming-of-age anxieties of a 12-year-old grappling with a destabilizing new identity. Production and costume design communicate character mythology through subtle integration rather than overt spectacle. Camp Half-Blood feels like a believably rustic summer retreat subtly adorned with Greek architectural motifs, making the fantasy environment feel lived in and plausible. Annabeth's wardrobe suggests pragmatic readiness, a modern evolution of a warrior's attire. Iconic items like the pensword Riptide remain faithfully realized, serving as tangible touchstones for readers and potent symbols of disguised power and heroic legacy. Expository dialogue often assumes an instructional function, directly explicating mythological rules and genealogies for the audience's benefit. This can occasionally disrupt narrative immersion, but efficiently constructs the world for viewers uninitiated in the lore. The film's humor frequently springs from deliberate anachronism, ancient entities employing modern slang or technology, a consistent choice that maintains a tone of light-hearted irreverence. This comedic strategy actively demystifies the gods, presenting them as dysfunctional, powerful personalities with contemporary affectations and flaws. The portrayal of the Olympian pantheon emphasizes their detached arrogance and volatile pride, captured in brief, council-based scenes. Zeus and Poseidon are rendered as archetypal, stormy patriarchs, their conflict fueled by bruised egos and ancient rivalries. Their divine realm is one of cold, luminous marble and cloud, aesthetically and emotionally distancing them from the earthy, perilous journey of their mortal offspring. These depictions remain true to the capricious spirit of the myths, but offer minimal exploration beyond their roles as instigators of the plot's central crisis. Action choreography highlights Percy's instinctual, elementally linked prowess, frequently depicting his abilities as an extension of his emotional state. Combat sequences are dynamically staged, visually distinguishing his untrained, reactive style from Annabeth's disciplined technique. Grover's role in fights is supportive and often comedic, utilizing his satyr agility for clever evasion and tactical distraction rather than direct confrontation. This division of labor visually codifies their respective character functions within the adventuring trio. Sally Jackson's character retains her indispensable narrative role as the emotional tether to the mortal world and the wellspring of Percy's core humanity. Her sacrificial capture acts as the catalyst for his personal odyssey, and her unconditional love is positioned as his ultimate motivation and reward. Her nuanced, weary understanding of the mythical world, born of protective secrecy, adds a layer of tragic resilience to her characterization. This dynamic ensures the epic fantasy remains firmly anchored in a universally relatable emotional truth: the bond between parent and child. Symbolism is conveyed through clear, elemental visual motifs, with water serving as a constant, multifaceted representation of Percy's heritage, sanctuary, and latent power. Sequences involving aquatic environments are where he demonstrates greatest agency and control, visually affirming his lineage. Storm and lightning imagery externally manifest Zeus's wrath, and the celestial discord threatening the stability of the world. These opposing elements of sea and sky visually dramatize the central conflict and the protagonist's divided allegiance between his father's domain and the weight of his uncle's accusation. The film's resolution provides conclusive closure to the immediate crisis while preserving a narrative thread for potential continuation. The restitution of the Master Bolt concludes the primary object-driven chase, and Percy's vindication secures his rightful place at Camp Half-Blood. Luke's survival and retreat clearly mark him as a persistent threat, though absent the ominous gravity of his role as a Titan's harbinger. The ending delivers a personal victory for Percy, but lacks the novel's haunting, ambiguous coda that explicitly foreshadows a far greater, more terrifying war on the horizon. Cultural impact briefly rejuvenated mainstream interest in Hellenic mythology, serving as a vibrant, if simplified, visual primer for a new generation. The film became a gateway for countless viewers to discover the richer, more complex literary series, despite its acknowledged deviations. Its specific aesthetic, the depiction of the camp, the weapons, the monsters, for a period dominated the public's visual conception of Riordan's universe. This underscores the formidable power of cinema to shape collective imagery, even of adapted properties with a pre-existing descriptive canon. Critical reception frequently noted a discernible gap between the film's energetic presentation and its narrative and emotional substance. Reviews acknowledged the appealing core premise and charismatic cast, but critiqued the hurried plotting and underdeveloped character beats. The consensus often positioned it as a competent but unexceptional entry in the post-Potter fantasy landscape, one that executed familiar genre beats without capturing the distinctive voice or meticulous construction of its source material. It was frequently perceived as a market-tested product rather than a passionate translation. From a screenwriting perspective, condensing the novel demanded significant narrative compression and the amalgamation of plot elements. Subplots involving other campers like Clarice, detailed training regimens, and the daily social rhythms of Camp Half-Blood were sacrificed for forward momentum. Key items and prophetic warnings were repurposed or omitted, altering the story's internal cause and effect. This streamlining is a universal adaptation challenge, but the specific choices made here fundamentally reshaped the story's scope, thematic resonance, and serialized potential. Cinematography and color grading visually chart Percy's metamorphosis from a muted, ordinary existence to increasingly saturated fantastical realms. The underworld is rendered in oppressive shadows and fiery amber, evoking a post-industrial inferno. Las Vegas glows with artificial, seductive neon, perfectly encapsulating its role as a temple of hollow distraction and stalled time. These deliberate visual palettes psychologically guide the audience, distinguishing the inherent dangers and moral atmospheres of each successive location. The film's internal logic for supernatural ability is intrinsically tied to divine lineage, a system of inherited aptitude rather than scholarly study. Powers manifest instinctively, often catalyzed by stress or strong emotion, emphasizing the concept of a genetic birthright awaiting activation. The limitations of these abilities are fluid, shaped more by dramatic necessity than rigorously defined rules, favoring spectacular moments of heroism over systematic consistency. This soft magic system aligns with the film's action-adventure priorities, but diverges from the novel's slightly more codified and learned application of demigod talents. The dynamic between Percy and Luke operates as a classic narrative mirror, with Luke embodying the path of corrosive resentment and vengeance. His betrayal is rooted in a profound sense of abandonment by the gods, transforming him into an ideological antagonist as much as a physical foe. Their final confrontation is a clash over the worthiness of their divine parents and the fundamental choice between seeking to reform or relentlessly destroy the existing Olympian order. This provides a clearly defined, thematically relevant conflict concerning legacy, forgiveness, and the cyclical nature of parental disappointment. Representation of Grover's satyr physiology is inconsistent, with his goat legs and limp appearing only at narratively convenient moments. This likely stemmed from practical filmmaking considerations regarding actor mobility and the desire to maintain the character's agility for comedic and action sequences. His mythological essence is conveyed more through behavioral traits, loyalty, protectiveness, a generalized love of nature, than through persistent, convincing physical prosthetics. This stands as a clear compromise between literary accuracy and the pragmatic demands of cinematic production. The film's handling of its central mystery, the identity of the master bolt thief, is streamlined for cinematic clarity and dramatic impact. Clues are presented visually and explicitly, allowing less room for audience deduction or misdirection. Luke's revelation as the traitor is timed for maximum third-act impact, providing a twist that recontextualizes his earlier mentorship and friendship. This structure crafts a straightforward emotional arc of trust established and then profoundly violated, prioritizing immediate dramatic payoff over intricate, novelistic plotting. Tonal navigation shifts between moments of light horror, comedy, and action with a deft hand, ensuring the film remains palatable for a broad family audience. Potentially frightening moments, such as the decapitation of Medusa, are swiftly resolved or undercut with humorous relief. This consistent technique prevents the narrative from dwelling in genuine darkness, reliably pulling back toward a spirit of adventure and spectacle. The overall equilibrium favors brisk entertainment and visual dynamism over sustained atmospheric tension or profound philosophical dread. Product placement and contemporary cultural references actively fortify the mythology among us central premise. Characters utilize recognizable brands, traverse identifiable interstate systems, and interact with the mundane artifacts of modern life. This grounding methodology strengthens the visceral contrast when the fantastical violently erupts, effectively selling the core concept that ancient forces operate incognito within our contemporary landscape. It is a conscious world-building choice that enhances verisimilitude within a present-day setting. The opening exposition, delivered within a classroom context, efficiently establishes the film's foundational premise through a clever narrative shortcut. Percy's own ignorance of his heritage allows for a natural diegetic infodump that educates the audience alongside the protagonist. Brief montages implying divine influence on pivotal historical events add playful depth and temporal scale to the backstory. This economical setup effectively orients the viewer to the film's unique mythological rules without resorting to a lengthy, disembodied prologue. Annabeth's characterization leans heavily into the warrior archetype, with her famed intelligence more often suggested through dialogue than demonstrated through action. Her initial hostility toward Percy is presented as a generalized prejudice against sons of Poseidon, lacking the deeply personal, matrilineal rivalry steeped in Athenian and Poseidonian lore from the novels. Her wisdom manifests primarily as tactical combat acumen rather than overarching strategic genius or scholarly mastery of myths. This interpretation renders her a formidable ally but simplifies the richly competitive and intellectually charged partnership that evolves in the source material. The role of divine sustenance, such as ambrosia and nectar, is minimized, excising a layer of mythological texture and potential narrative peril. Scenes of communal dining at camp that foster camaraderie and elaborate on demigod culture are largely absent. These omissions, while seemingly minor, contribute to a slightly less tactile and culturally rich depiction of demigod life, where the connection to the gods is also maintained through ritual, shared consumption, and the ever-present danger of divine addiction. Percy's mastery of his hydrokinetic abilities follows a classic cinematic trajectory of power unlocked through emotional climax or extreme duress. His connection to water is portrayed as an instinctual, almost spiritual link he must learn to trust rather than a skill he painstakingly develops through training. The film showcases little formal mentorship in his power use, emphasizing the born hero narrative where innate talent and courage triumph over practiced skill. This aligns with timeless archetypal storytelling, but diverges from the book's emphasis on gradual skill acquisition, disciplined practice, and the crucial role of mentorship. The film's treatment of mythological monsters tacitly acknowledges their cyclical, regenerative nature, with dialogue noting their reformation in Tartarus. This introduces a compelling concept of eternal recurrence, where primordial threats can be defeated but never permanently eradicated from the cosmic order. It aligns with the source materials and the original myths, depiction of monsters as persistent forces of chaos awaiting the next hero to confront them. This adds a layer of philosophical depth to the world building, suggesting that victories are often temporary within an endless, archetypal struggle. Aerial and wide shots employed during the cross-country travel sequences emphasize the vast, epic scale of the American landscape as the quest's authentic backdrop. These expansive, open vistas contrast sharply with the confined, often interior or underworld spaces where the mythological confrontations occur. The journey itself, from the East Coast to the West, becomes a symbolic American odyssey, embedding ancient myth into the very geography and iconography of the modern nation. This conscious setting choice differentiates it from fantasy journeys through entirely fictional or historically European landscapes. Ethical complexities, such as the moral weight of wielding Medusa's severed head as a weapon, are largely glossed over in favor of its utility as a clever, macabre tactical tool. The narrative's relentless pace allows no room for moral quandary or debate about the horror inherent in the object itself. This reflects a more utilitarian, black-and-white morality within the film's universe, where the tools of evil can be justly repurposed against evil forces without significant moral residue. Moral nuance is frequently sacrificed at the altar of narrative efficiency and clear-cut heroic action. Auditory design crafts distinctive soundscapes for key mythological locations, such as the hypnotic, layered murmur of the Lotus Casino or the cavernous, echoing roars of the underworld. Percy's associative musical leitmotif often incorporates aqueous textures or melodic flows, sonically tagging his divine heritage. The master bolt itself crackles with a unique, overwhelming sonic energy, making its divine power audibly palpable and threatening. These meticulous sonic details enrich the sensory immersion into the film's fantastical elements, building atmosphere beyond the visual. The film's handling of Percy's dyslexia and ADHD as hardwiring for ancient Greek and battle reflexes is presented as explanatory, surface-level character notes. However, it lacks any substantive exploration of how these neurodivergent traits have tangibly shaped his lived experience or demonstrably aid his demigod abilities beyond a line of dialogue. The concept is introduced as a clever narrative twist on his academic struggles, but remains a largely undeveloped character aspect, rather than an integrated facet of his perception, learning, and combat style. Cinematic influences and genre homage are readily apparent, with the hidden training camp, core trio dynamic, and chosen one heritage inviting direct comparison to other fantasy franchises. The journey's overarching structure consciously echoes classical epic templates like the Odyssey, albeit in a radically condensed and modernized form. The film operates comfortably within established blockbuster and adventure genre conventions, evidently aware of its narrative predecessors and aiming to deliver a familiar yet distinct experience within that well-understood framework. The economic context of its production, during the zenith of the young adult adaptation gold rush, positioned it as a calculated franchise starter with sequel ambitions. Significant investment in digital effects, recognizable stars, and expansive marketing aimed to launch a multi-film series. This commercial reality invariably influenced creative choices, encouraging a broad, inoffensive appeal designed to maximize audience reach across demographics. The result is a film that can, at times, feel strategically assembled to meet specific market expectations, rather than organically grown from a singular, unfiltered artistic vision. Character arcs undergo accelerated, pressurized development due to the severely condensed timeline, with pivotal relationship shifts occurring across days instead of weeks or months. Percy's acceptance of Poseidon progresses rapidly from resentment to recognition without the intervening period of ambivalent reflection. Annabeth's trust is earned primarily through shared combat peril rather than through slowly built mutual respect and intellectual challenge. Grover's loyalty is presented as a steadfast constant from the outset, lacking his own parallel quest for identity and purpose as a searcher. These arcs are simplified to their most essential emotional beats, prioritizing clarity over gradual, nuanced evolution. The diminished role of prophecy and preordained fate profoundly alters the nature of the character's agency and the narrative's philosophical undertones. Without the oracle's cryptic words guiding and constraining their choices, the journey feels more like a series of reactive adventures than deliberate steps along a foretold and potentially tragic path. This excision removes a layer of dramatic irony and the profound burden of choice that the book's prophecy imposes, where characters must wrestle with the limits of free will within a predetermined framework. The film's protagonists become more purely active shapers of their immediate destiny, less haunted by the specter of a fixed, inescapable endpoint. Visual cues for divine heritage are deliberately subtle during passive moments, allowing demigods to blend seamlessly into mortal society, a key aspect of the premise. When their powers activate, the effects are visually distinct and elementally tied to their parentage. Water manipulation, enhanced combat perception, environmental empathy. The mist is the frequently invoked, though rarely visualized, mechanism that maintains the masquerade, explaining mortal ignorance through magical perception filters. This system allows for spectacular displays of power, while consistently maintaining the world's central secretive premise. The resolution of Sally Jackson's subplot offers heartfelt, emotionally satisfying closure, liberating her from the underworld and hinting at a more hopeful future. Her implicit, weary understanding with Chiron suggests a deeper shared history and a united commitment to protecting Percy. Her final, silent embrace of her son returns the epic narrative to a human-scale moment of unconditional love and familial triumph. This reaffirms the film's central grounding theme that mortal connections and love are the ultimate rewards, more valuable and enduring than divine glory, power, or acknowledgement. In retrospective analysis, The film endures as a significant case study in early 21st century blockbuster adaptation, prioritizing high-concept premise and broad demographic accessibility over niche fidelity to source material. Its enduring strengths are found in its imaginative core conceit and the committed, charismatic efforts of its young cast to embody these iconic roles under a condensed narrative framework. Its most profound legacy, however, is largely defined by its creative deviations, which ultimately galvanized a passionate fan desire for a more authentic, nuanced retelling. It serves as a pivotal, if flawed, chapter in the property's evolution, demonstrating both the immense commercial potential of Riordan's universe and the artistic perils of distancing a cinematic story from the foundational spirit, structure, and soul of its literary origin.